Okay, everybody, welcome to this morning's Bambuddha Boost. We are very, very lucky to have Stacey Copas with us this morning. Stacey is dubbed the Queen of Resilience by 8 times world surfing champion Blaine Beachley. Stacey has not let a devastating accident that left her a quadriplegic and dependent on a wheelchair at 12 years old slow her down. Instead, she's used her life experience and personal philosophies to help leaders shift the way they perceive and respond to change and adversity. Working with large organisations such as Telstra, Holden and Flight Centre, Stacey is the author of How to Be Resilient and has been featured by Financial Review, ABC Radio and The Australian for her insights on resilience in the workplace. In her spare time, you are likely to find her in the nearest patch of sunshine with a book, recharging her solar powers. That was very good. Today, Stacey will be sharing her inspirational story with us, filled with insights on how to be resilient in business and in life. I think there couldn't be a better time for us to have Stacey and her amazing story shared with our community far and wide. So I will do what I do best and I'll disappear and I'll be back in 15 minutes and I'll hand you over to the lovely Stacey.
Thank you. Lucky it's not sunny here today, so there was no conflict in where I was going to be this morning, that's for sure. So let me take you back in time, and it was the 2nd of December 1990, and I was standing on the edge of a backyard swimming pool, and this was a pool that was very familiar to me. It was at a relative's place, and I was there that day with my younger brother who was 10 and a couple of other kids around the same age. Now, being the only girl and being that bit older, I didn't want anything to do with them. So I did what I did every time I was there visiting, and I like to climb up on the edge of the pool and just keep diving in. Now, this was an above ground pool, so definitely not built for diving. And I was getting yelled at to stop, but I'm sure you can remember what it was like being 12 and bulletproof and invincible. So I completely ignored those requests to stop. Instead, this particular time when I was standing on the edge, I was thinking that the dives I'd done before that one were splashing too much. So I thought, what could I do to make a perfect dive? So I stood there for a moment and I thought, what if I hold my feet together and keep my legs straight? I thought in theory that would make a really good dive. So I did exactly that, took a deep breath and dived in like that. Now, it felt like any other dive that I'd done before until I went to try and swim up to the surface and I realized I couldn't move. So I was completely conscious. I didn't feel any pain. It didn't feel like anything had gone wrong, but I could not move. So panic set in really quickly, and I was panicking, trying to hold my breath, thinking, how can I get the attention of my brother to help me? And I held my breath for as long as I could, but then when I couldn't hold it any longer, I had to give in. And as I gave in and my lungs filled with water, I blacked out. Now, eventually my brother realized I wasn't mucking around. They thought I was joking, so they just had sort of left me, and I heard recently that they were just splashing me, thinking, you know, you're just kidding around. So eventually they realised that I wasn't, and they raised the alarm for help. And it was later that night at the 3rd hospital that I was taken to that doctors came and told me in intensive care that I'd actually broken my neck and drowned and I'd never walk again. So what happened to me is a pretty extreme example of something not going to plan. And for most, something not going to plan is not so extreme and doesn't have such extreme consequences, but we are dealing with things not going to plan all the time. And so throughout my journey, I've been able to use adversity, uncertainty, and change to be able to use them as opportunities to grow and to challenge myself and to become more resilient in the process. And I'm going to share some of this with you this morning. And the thing I've discovered with resilience is that it's the kind of thing you need to have before you need to use it. It's much like that old adage about needing to dig your well before you're thirsty. And to succeed in the challenging times that we're in right now, doing things the way we've always done them before is no longer an option. And once we start trying to do things in a different way and new ways, it's fairly certain that things are not going to go as planned. There's going to be setbacks. We're going to have challenges along the way. So what I'd really love to do is to be able to give you some tips so that you can be prepared for when those things happen, so that when you do hit the speed bumps, you can actually launch from them rather than getting tripped up by them. And there's often a perception that resilience is something that you have naturally or you don't, but it's actually a skill. And it's a skill that can be learned like any other skill. And the thing that I can liken it most to is that we go to the gym to build and maintain physical strength. And resilience is very similar in that in the gym, we do simple things consistently and repetitively to then build that physical strength. Resilience is much the same. There are simple practices, simple rituals that we can do consistently to build our resilience. And it's much like the thing with going to the gym. It's something we need to keep doing, otherwise we do lose it. It's not like you can read a book on resilience or hear a talk on resilience or perhaps have a coaching session on resilience and suddenly you're resilient for life. It's something that we do need to keep at, and it's something that I do every day still. And I have a little bit of a different take on resilience than most, and I actually see resilience as a growth strategy and as a skill. And resilience, unfortunately, I've felt today, and particularly in a corporate environment, I feel that resilience has become synonymous with coping. And it's often referred to as bouncing back, which I feel really sells it short, because bouncing back is implying that you keep coming back to the same point at which you were before you had a setback. Whereas I see that it's more about how we thrive rather than just survive. And it's also how we can actually grow through challenges rather than just going through them. And often the bigger the challenges we face, the more resilience and the more growth and the more learning opportunities there are. And if you think of it like an archer, if you have an archer and as they pull that bow back, the more tension there is on that bow, when they let it go, the faster that arrow gets propelled forward. So the times that you feel the most uncomfortable, there's the most resistance, you feel the most pressure, those are the most amazing opportunities for you to grow and learn and become stronger through. And as a little bit of a caveat on the things that I talk about and the things that I share is that they sound simple, and that's because they are simple. We have a tendency to overcomplicate things, and there's real power in the simplicity. But there's also danger in simplicity too, because there's often a tendency that if we hear something simple, we just go, yeah, I know that, and we switch off. So my challenge to you from today and this point forward is if you do find yourself in that space where you're going, yeah, I know that, and you're switching off, is to actually stop and challenge yourself, to stop and ask yourself, do I do that? Could I do it better? Could I do it differently? Knowing that there's a difference between knowing and doing something. And also to remember that often we need to hear the same message over and over again, either at different times in our lives or from a different messenger for those messages to land. So hopefully there'll be a few of those little moments that land for you here this morning as well. Now look, going back before I had the accident, I had definite plans for what I was going to do with my life. And from the time I could talk, well before I even went to school, I knew that all I wanted to do with my life was to become a vet. And for my schooling, everything I did was focused on that next step of becoming a vet. And at 12, when I had my injury, I was preparing to go into high school, and I'd actually passed the entrance exams to get into a selective agricultural high school, which was a really big tick on that next step towards becoming a vet. And aside from that, I was an athlete, and I played softball in summer. I was a pitcher, and I was one of the first two girls to ever play soccer for my school. This is like over 30 years ago, so I feel very old now. But yeah, so that was a big goal, and that's something that I'd achieved there. And I was a runner. I was obsessed with running, and I represented my school at every distance from the 100 meters right through to the cross country. So academically doing great, athletically doing great, had pretty normal family life, great friends. So I was in that position where I felt like I was really doing well, anything was possible, and I was on track. So being told that I'd never walk again literally felt like a death sentence to me at that time. Now, my high school years were incredibly tough. I really struggled to accept what had happened, and I ended up really bitter and angry and resentful. And all of those things were directed at myself because I was in that situation because of my own actions. And the only times I felt remotely happy was when I was drunk or stoned, which ended up being quite a lot for those high school years. And the trap that I fell into there is between those moments of artificial happiness that I was creating, I ended up falling into deeper pits of depression, despair, and anxiety in between. But I hid that really well from everybody. I was really good at the nothing to see here. I'm getting on with life. But reality was I hated life and I hated myself. Looking back, physically I drowned once, but emotionally I was drowning every single day at that point in time. And look, going back those first few years after the accident, if I could have been able to turn back the clock and not have taken that fateful dive, I absolutely would never have done it. One of the things that did help me through in those darkest of times, though, was music. I found that I was able to, when I felt that I couldn't relate to anybody or I didn't want to talk to anybody and I didn't know how to express myself, I found that music was the thing that really helped me to do that. Music gave me the medium and the words to express myself in a way that I couldn't. And I never really felt alone when I had my music, and I was surrounded by posters of my favorite bands, and I was able to immerse in the music. And I was really fortunate actually to be at my lowest point in my life at the height of grunge, which was the most angry, angsty music I think we've ever really had. So I was really fortunate that that music really did help me to build resilience. And I really feel, looking back, it actually kept me alive at the lowest points. Once I sort of got towards the end of high school, though, I really started to get out of those dark spots. I left some of those destructive habits behind. And then once I got into my 20s, I completely changed the way I looked at the accident. And I looked at it with absolute gratitude. I was absolutely grateful for how it changed my life. And most people think, how the hell can ending up a quadriplegic and needing a wheelchair for the rest of your life be positive? But when people spend time with me, they see very quickly that I am really happy. I'm grateful for how it's changed my life. And I can say with absolute certainty, I've had the most amazing opportunities and met the most amazing people that would never have happened had my life taken the path that I chose. And it just ultimately, it came down to a choice. Was I going to let it ruin my life or make my life better? And sometimes people go, like, it can't be that simple, but it actually was. We have a choice in these things. And while I couldn't change what had happened, I could change how I felt about what happened, and I could absolutely change what I did from that point forward. And today, gratitude is such an important part of every single day, and it's something that I would say is a bit of a superpower, and it's a ritual that you can learn as well, and it's such an important part of resilience. And things not going to plan, especially when we're trying new things, getting out of our comfort zones, can be great at times because it can snap us out of that autopilot, the mindlessly going through the actions that we often find ourselves getting stuck in a rut of. And what we're experiencing now globally has been a perfect example of this. What's happened has actually snapped us out of the autopilot, and it's forced our hand and it's forced us to look at things differently and to actually make different choices and to do things differently. So it actually has been, in some senses, a really positive experience for many of us. And along the way, over the years, I've ended up adopting what I call a say yes and figure out how the hell to do it later attitude to life. And that's really enabled me to have such incredible experiences. And I've been able to do some pretty remarkable things when I look back on it. And some of these things I can't even believe I said yes to, let alone followed through on. Some of the most fun ones were starring in a feature film with absolutely zero acting experience, volunteering in the Solomon Islands as a peer mentor to people with disabilities when I'd never even been overseas before, and I'm a very precious city girl. And then competing at a national level in athletics after sitting on the sidelines for 22 years after I made a pact with my 12-year-old self that I was never going to play sport again because I couldn't play it like I used to. And then I was able to then go back and compete at a national level in my 30s. And then probably the most extreme thing I did was I actually ran for parliament. So I ran for local government and I also ran for the state parliament in my 20s. I realised I wanted to make a difference. I realised that is not how I want to make a difference. And I can say definitely I have absolutely zero desire to be a politician after that experience. So look, having a brush with death and losing the ability to walk has meant that I take absolutely nothing for granted now. Not only do I appreciate fully every single day I have, I now have this most incredible burning desire to see more, to do more, to be more, and to give more. And what I would really love to do now is to be able to ignite that desire in you. Not that you have to experience it through a crisis in your life, but be able to spark that so that you can actually be really present and intentional in every day. You can value every moment. You can value the people in your life, and you can also recognize, and I'm sure these last couple of months have highlighted it for you too, that just because just the way things are is not how they're going to always be. So making sure that you do that and to take some chances, try new things, meet new people. And look, I'm super grateful for the connection to come in and do the boost this morning. My great friend and photographer and branding extraordinaire, Zarina Robertson, was kind enough to introduce me to Anna. And I'm so grateful that she's been supporting some of these sessions and has been a great asset in my business. And I'm so super grateful for Zarina for connecting us up and bringing me here to share with you this morning. And look, if this has resonated with you, I absolutely welcome you to connect with me on your platform of choice. I'm very active on LinkedIn. And yeah, it'd be great to connect and hear what your insights have been. So look, there you have it. Crazy story of my life so far, and succeeding over and over again in times of uncertainty, change, and adversity. But there's actually nothing extraordinary about me. So often when I speak or share my story, people come up to me and send me messages afterwards and go, "That was amazing. That was so inspiring, but I could never do that." But the reality is I'm no different than you. I haven't had resources along this way. I've just been incredibly resourceful, and I've just applied the rituals for resilience, the strategies for resilience from my book, How to Be Resilient, to be able to enable me to have the confidence and the resilience to say yes to things that challenge me, that get me out of my comfort zone, knowing that I had the resilience to come back even if it doesn't go to plan. And all of the extraordinary experiences I've had have just been a direct result of the decisions I've made. In every moment you have a choice, and even at the points where they feel incredibly low and they feel overwhelming and hopeless, you do have the ability to make the choice that you want and deserve something better than that. And just by making a decision that you want something different, that's the starting point from where anything is possible. So from this point forward, when something doesn't go to plan, when you're feeling overwhelmed with the uncertainty and the change that we're experiencing right now, I'd love you to stop. Stop for a moment and be grateful for where you are right now, to get excited about what's ahead, and know that if that moment is an opportunity or an obstacle, is completely your choice. And particularly at this point in time, to know that when nothing is certain, anything is possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stacey, and such powerful words. And we've been very, very lucky to have Stacey share her time. Very kind of you to share your time. She's very sought after speaker. Career is booming, and we're really lucky that you've been able to share that. Have anybody got any questions while we're holding Stacey hostage for a couple more minutes? Has anybody got any questions? We've got Charlotte said, "Thank you for sharing your inspiring story." I think you pretty much covered it, but one of the things I wanted to ask was, how can people begin embracing uncertainty with so much unknown at the moment? And you just mentioned that, there's a few strategies there, but I think the general kind of collective consciousness is quite anxious. And what would be your advice in this current climate around how people can start embracing that uncertainty?
Yeah, there's two things, and I guess just that what I just touched on when in closing was to recognize that when things are uncertain, that anything is possible. So it's a bit of a reframe. So instead of looking at it and going, "Wow, this is overwhelming because I have no idea what's happening," it's almost looking at it almost like a blank canvas and going, "Because I don't know what's happening, anything could happen, and I can make anything happen." But one of the things that I find also really useful in times of uncertainty is we need to actually create as much certainty as we can in our day-to-day lives. So this is where rituals are really important. So I mentioned rituals for resilience a few times there. So I think the most basic one that we can use every day is gratitude. And I have a little bit of a different take on the typical way that you hear gratitude expressed. So most of the time we hear, write down 10 things you're grateful for, write down 5 things you're grateful for, that kind of thing. I find that's a little bit wanky actually, because so often, how many times are you going, "Oh, write down 10 things I'm grateful for?" Like, you're not really embodying it and really not embracing it. So there's 2 ways that I approach gratitude. One is to get to the end of every day and go, what was the best thing that happened today? And for those that go, "Nothing, it's been a really crap day," I go, "Okay, what was the least shit thing that happened today?" So it's all about we get what we look for. So it's a matter of starting to train ourselves to look for the positive, even when things do feel overwhelming, and creating certainty. So little things like for those of us that have been working from home for the last few months, it's trying to put structure in your day, because it's so easy. We made light of it earlier, Anna, about we've brushed our hair, we've got our makeup on, we've done all that sort of stuff. But it's doing those things even when no one's watching. It's doing that even when we don't have to get on Zoom. It's getting up at the same time. It's actually getting dressed for work as if we were going to work instead of staying in our jammies all day and our Uggies. It's creating structure. I know what I did really early on in this piece is I felt that I needed to be of service. I didn't know what I was going to do. But what I did was I started what I call a virtual drop-in centre every day. So at midday every day, I open my Zoom room. Anyone anywhere in the world can pop in and say hi and have a chat, because I think one of the big things that has really contributed to the uncertainty and the disconnect has been that the languaging around we've got to socially distance. And I took exception to that really early on, because for me, it's about physically distancing, and we need to be socially connected more than we ever have. So it's making sure that you actually tee up times to have conversations with your colleagues, have conversations with family, have conversations with friends. I've done things like playing Cards Against Humanity via Zoom with friends, doing all these things, just whatever we could do to stay connected. And I've found that I've actually strengthened my connections way beyond what they were before this time. But it took effort, and it takes being proactive. So yeah, putting structure in, creating certainty, and just routine. Routine is so important, because it's so easy to fall into the trap of going, oh, I'll do it later, or I might, be doing my emails at 10 o'clock at night, and then getting into poor sleep habits. And poor sleep then affects our resilience. Poor sleep affects our ability to think clearly when we're overwhelmed as well. So just a few tips there, but definitely it's around structure, routine, rituals. They're the things that are going to actually get us through, and combined with embracing that there's possibility and uncertainty, I think those things together really help us to embrace it and be able to come out of the other side of this much stronger.
Yeah, and I think that advice was really refreshing, actually, around the gratitude. Let's look back on the day and think about what has gone really well, or what's the least rubbish thing from today, is such a good way of looking at it. And we've got one more question, because we're gonna leave soon, from Nicole Doan. Hi, Nicole, lovely to see you. What advice or language do you have for managers supporting co-workers, teams to build resilience?
Look, the key word there is language, and that's something, it's actually a complete chapter in my book about resilience, because particularly from leadership and from management, the narrative is so important. So it's around using more positive language. It's being realistic as well, and it's being quite honest, but it's not awfulizing situations. It's not being overly dramatic about it, because the thing, what I've realized is the way we describe a situation is how we experience it. So it's really important to go, is this the right word choice for the scene I'm trying to set? Is this what I would like my team to be feeling about this? So it can be, looking at word swaps and things like that. And so it's often people will use things like, it was devastating, it was, it was terrible, it was awful, it was horrendous, when really it was disappointing.
Yeah.
So, and if you just think about how those words sit in our bodies, devastating versus disappointing, the way we experience it is very differently. And communication is such a huge thing. So it's not only about the narrative, it's about the communication, which is two-way. So I feel that's what's really important at any time, but more important now, is to be having constant informal conversations with the teams, with every one of the people in the teams. It's having, even if it's a 30 to 60-second conversation every week, going, how are you? How are you feeling? What are you working on? What challenges do you have? How can I best support you as a leader? And if we have those conversations every single week, then it's more likely that a team member that might be struggling will actually share that rather than just bottling it up, because often some of these conversations end up just being really formal, and they happen once a year when it's time for an annual appraisal or a performance review. So if we can have really open conversation and just get to know people, obviously you don't have to be in everyone's pockets, you don't have to know everything about them, but just feel that you understand them and you actually get a little bit of an insight on what's important to them, what inspires and motivates them, and then you can use those to have that great dialogue. It also means quite often that a lot of questions I get asked are around how do you have a difficult conversation with a colleague or a team member. It's like if you have these conversations all the time, it's highly unlikely that you're going to get to the point where there needs to be a truly difficult conversation had.
Really good. And I think Stacey does consult with regards to resilience to organisations and businesses and supports teams. Speaker, you've got to get that book, everybody. I think that's the first thing I'm doing as soon as I get offline today is, I've always considered myself quite resilient, but in every interaction I've had with Stacey, I've learned something. So, thank you for your authentic way of being. Thank you for showing up honestly and with such passion and kindness. And thank you so much. We're going to share this far and wide, this video as well, so everyone gets a look in. And that's it for today. But we do tomorrow have another boost at 10 a.m. with Doreen Brown, and it's all about search engine optimization. So sounds a bit boring in comparison, but actually is absolutely essential right now to make sure your business is present and available and your content is making headway. So let's give Stacey a big round of applause. Lots of love, and we'll see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. for the boost.
Have an amazing day.
See you soon.
Bye.